Hey guys, in this video we're going to talk about the CPI, the PPI, the GDP deflator, and I'll go over something I forgot to put in the GDP video. Alright, here we go. Okay, GDP, what I left out is it's equal to C plus I plus G plus net exports. Net exports. What does that mean? C stands for consumption. How much, what's the value of everything we consume in that year as a country? So what's the value of everything everybody in the United States buys and consumes that year? Next is I, investment. How much do people invest in new businesses, new opportunities? Inventory is a good example. If you ever, for example, a cupcake shop, they have to invest in buying the dough, they got to invest in buying the milk, and they have to invest in buying the chocolate, all the things needed for the cupcakes. That's counted under investment because it's in their inventory. The inventory is that little place, in the back of the shop where you keep all your stuff, and it's stuff you need to make your product, and you need it on hand like that. G is government spending. I'll abbreviate government spending. And and there's net exports. Net exports means exports minus imports. Exports is what we send out, what we send to the country because they want to buy it from us. Imports is what we send in when we want to buy stuff from other countries. So, for example, we might want to buy sneakers coming from China, and we might send out corn because we're the biggest corn producer in the world. So we might send corn out to other countries. So, but the total value of everything we send out minus what we send in, that's our net exports. So GDP is the sum of all those. All right, let's talk about something called the GDP deflator. Now I said inflation was going to be a big part for the rest of macroeconomics, and we're going to start now. GDP deflator measures inflation in the broadest sense. To calculate GDP deflator, you do nominal GDP over real GDP times 100. Now, inflation, like I said, is an increase in prices. So, let's look at this. For example, let's compare this. 2009 and 2010. Nominal GDP or real GDP. Okay, so in 2009, it was $10. And in 10 it was 20. So there's an increase there. In 2009, this was 10 and this was 15. Because remember, this real GDP measures output, and this measures price and output. That's why I didn't put the dollar sign there. So that's how you can put the dollar sign there, but I'm doing this to make it more clear. Okay, so let's measure the GDP deflator for 2009. GDP deflator 2009. Nominal over real times 100. So 10 divided by 10 is 1, times 100 is 100. Now let's measure GDP deflator for 10. Okay, nominal over real times 100. Now, you can go ahead and do these calculations. The number comes out to 133. So if we take this as the base percentage, and we take this as the new percentage, something increased by 33%. And what's that something? That something's price. Because since GDP measures inflation, and inflation is an increase in price, whatever increase you find from the GDP deflator from one year to another, that's going to be an increase in price. But let's look at this. Real GDP, we already said that that's the output, right? This 10 to this 15, that's change in output. So, output increased by 50%. Because half of 10 is 5, 5 plus 10 is 15, so increase 50%. So, prices increased 33%, and the output increased 50%. So just by that, you see what was more responsible for the change in GDP. Prices were responsible for what looks like 33% of the change, while output 50% of the change. So Obviously, we produced more while the change in price, the inflation, was less. Okay, I'm going to do more on GDP deflator in another video. The next video will be like GDP deflator, CPI, PPI 2. So don't get worried if you're not understanding right now. I just want to speed through it so you get the basic idea. So now we're going to talk about the CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index. CPI. Consumer Price Index. Okay, Consumer Price Index measures what a typical consumer purchases. Typical, I'll abbreviate, cons purchases. So what typically me and you and everybody is going to purchase for that year. So here's how it's calculated. Let's say one year we went to the grocery store and we bought some kind of groceries for a total of $100 in 2009. The next year we bought the same exact groceries, same brand, same everything, and instead it was $115. So something increased there. And it was the same exact stuff. So obviously the price increased. So how are we going to measure this? That's the CPI calculation. You can see the CPI, that's CPI from the year 09 to the year 10. Alright, but there are a few problems with CPI. This, by the way, just like GDP deflator, it measures inflation, but it's the best indicator of inflation. Because GDP deflator measures the economy as a whole, which is every product. This measures specific products, specifically what we consume. But there are some problems with CPI, and here they are. There's 4 problems with CPI. Problem number 1, it doesn't calculate substitutes. So, for example, the price of concert tickets goes up $10, right? So what are you going to do? If that's too expensive for you, you're going to instead go to the movies where the ticket's the same price. So CPI can't calculate that. CPI assumes that you're going to still go to that concert with the higher price. So that's why it overstates inflation. CPI says inflation is much higher, not much higher, but higher than it actually is. Alright. Problem number 2. It doesn't calculate changes in technology. Let's say in 2009 you bought a TV and it cost you $2,000. And in 2010 you bought the same TV and it cost you $1,000. The price dropped, right? CPI is going to think, the price dropped, I guess it got worse. But actually, the technology to make TVs improved, so now they can make them cheaper, the same product, cheaper. So it can't measure that technology got better. It can only assume that the product got worse by a decrease in price. Next, outlet stores aren't included. This is, I don't even really know why outlet stores aren't included, but they're not. Outlet stores like, I don't know if you've ever seen them, but just Bell's Outlet, Gap Outlet, outlet stores. You can go Google that. I don't want to spend a lesson describing them. Next, it's called the new product bias. CPI doesn't measure new products. So for example, if a new iPod came out and it cost $500, the CPI wouldn't measure that because it can't account for new products. So CPI is lagging quite a bit amount of years because you can't just, it takes a lot of effort to make the CPI, so you can't just add a whole bunch of products every year because a lot of products come out every year. You can't just add them every year to the CPI, so there's a huge time lag. Okay, next is the PPI, which is the Producer Price Index. This is called a leading indicator of inflation. While the CPI indicated the average cost, what the average consumer spends, this will estimate what the average producer spends. So why is that a leading indicator of inflation? Because if the PPI increases, that means consumers are spending more. And if consumers are spending more, that means they're going to have to increase prices to cover that cost. So our prices, consumers, will increase, but only after this increases. Because think about it. If Walmart has to pay more now to make their products, Walmart doesn't make products, it's a bad example. If Nintendo has to pay more now to buy their products, their PPI will increase because they have to pay more, inflation. And right after that increases, then this will increase because now we have to pay more after they've paid more. After they've increased their costs, we have to increase our costs because they're going to increase the price to cover those costs. Okay. So here, and just like that, if the PPI decreases, that means it's cheaper to make stuff. The CPI will decrease too. And you guessed it, if the PPI increases, so does the CPI. And this is calculated just like CPI. If the producer, an average producer, spends $100 to produce a product, and the next year they produce $150, that's your CPI. Okay. And I'm going to finish with something called the costs of inflation. What's the big thing we have to pay due to inflation, increase in prices? Well, there's three things. One is shoe leather. Sounds funky, but what this really means is now we're going to have to, since prices increased, we want to find the cheapest price, obviously, so we're going to spend time finding the cheapest price among a bunch of stores because now we don't know what the prices in each of those stores is because they change. Okay. Number two is menu costs. You may not have thought about this a lot, but when prices increase, let's say the price of the PPI increased, so now producers have to spend more to make what they made before. So McDonald's PPI increases, costs them more to make burgers, so they have to charge more for burgers. So they have to replace every single menu in the entire world with the new menu of the new prices in order to cover those costs. That's the cost, that's the menu cost. The cost of replacing the menus. That's usually only with like those big expensive menus like at McDonald's. If you're a little business that hands out paper pamphlets as menus, it's a lot simpler to replace them. Nonetheless, you have to adjust. Last is expectations. When prices get higher, we have to adjust to that. So when gas increases from, let's say gas was $3, and you were like, okay, and then it increased to $3.50. That's about it. Let me just change that to $3.10 overnight. Well, now you're angry, right? So after time, you're going to adjust to that. You're going to deal with it, and eventually, that's going to increase again to $3.15, and you're going to be angry again because you thought it was going to be $3.10, and then that's going to increase again to $3.20, and you're going to be angry again because you thought it was going to be $3.15. That's we pay in our expectations. That's how it is. So that's a CPI and the PPI and GDP deflator. I'll talk a little bit more about all of them in the next video, which will be like this video, but number 2, just so we can clarify some things. I just wanted to get the basic ideas in so we can actually practice it next video. Alright, thanks for watching.